to make. Janet and I were able to get out of town this past week for a few days, and I love to play golf. I don't get to play very often because from Kinmundy you have to drive 35, 40 minutes any direction to play. It takes you an hour and a half or whatever, so you blow a whole day. So I don't get to play very often. But when I'm on vacation, that's one thing that I do, is play golf. I learned this week, give it up. Give it up. Last year on vacation I played, Tyler beat me like a rose. Okay? This year I played, Janet beat me. I think God's telling me, listen, you need to find a different pastime when you're on vacation. No, we had a lot of fun. She did beat me, and that's fine. That's fine. We enjoyed doing it. We just enjoyed the time. So it was just nice to get out in all these this crazy time that we're living in, and you know, we are making adjustments and that kind of thing. But anyway, I think we still have a long way to go. But I wanted to share that with you to let you know how my week went this week. But we had a great time. Okay, joke of the week. The preacher's wife called him and asked him to pick up some organic kale. Now, for those of you that don't know what kale is, I had no idea what it is until recently. And I love salad, but it's an herb that you put in with your salad, basically. Okay? And anyway, his wife said, hey, pick up some organic kale to have with the salad that night as you come home. So he got to the store, walking around trying to find this organic kale. So he stopped and asked one of the workers, you know, the clerk that was there, hey, I found some kale, but is this organic? And the young clerk didn't know what he was talking about. All I need to know is, this is for my wife, and all I need to know is this thing been sprayed with poison? He said, I'm sorry, Reverend, but you'll have to do that yourself. You don't do Oh, boy. All right, let's have a word of prayer and we'll get into the message. Father in heaven, thank you so much. You're such a great God. You bless us. You take care of us. We're just blessed beyond measure. Father, thank you for that. Thank you so much for this church, the people that are in it. I ask that you a special blessing on those that are at home, maybe watching us live right now. I ask that you keep all of us, our minds focused on what's going on here. It's my prayer that you be lifted up, that your name be glorified. Father, work through me to give me the right words to say this morning. Father, just once again, just get all distractions out of our head. And it's in your Son's name that I pray. Amen. Okay, as I said last week, I'm starting a series on the book of James. It's just a great book. I love it. It's a good one to sit down and read, and if you want to, a lot of ministers and stuff will tell you, if you've never read before, start in the book of John, and that's great, and that's correct. I have no problem with that. But then I recommend go to the book of James. The book of James will teach you almost anything you need to know about how to live a Christian life. The book of James will. And it covers almost everything in there. And also, as I told you last week, this James that wrote the book is Jesus' brother. As a matter of fact, it's believed to be the oldest of Jesus' younger brothers. Okay, so, and I never thought about that until this week, that if this in fact is Jesus' oldest younger brother, James probably spent more time with Jesus on earth than anybody. Stop and think about that. He probably spent more time on earth with Jesus than anybody. Now, he would have stories to tell us, like the one Kim was talking this morning about siblings, and I'm sure that at times that James probably said this, gee, it's not fair. Jesus gets to do this and I don't. We're just speculating. We don't have that for a fact. But they were brothers. Brothers fought. Brothers got into it. They had discussions, that kind of thing. But anyway, talk about a perspective. James has a perspective that nobody else had, in my opinion. This is what I'm thinking. So pick up the book of James and read it. And we're going to go through it. And I'm going to make it as speedy as I can to try to get through this. I will tell you that whenever I preach through the book of James in Macedonia, the church that I preach at once a month, I was a year and a half doing it. It took me a year and a half to get through it. So it might be 3 months doing this. So I hope you guys have the patience. We can stop if something else comes up, and that's fine. But it's interesting that I found whenever I preach a series like this, is that there will be something that will happen in the world, maybe it's in the area or whatever, that fits in with whatever that scripture has to say. So anyway, that's where we're at. That's how I got here. So let's go on with it. Last week we went up to, we covered all the way to verse 4 in chapter 1. Verse 4. And what we talked about was having joy in trials. Now, you don't have joy because of the trials, except for the fact that whenever you go through trials, God is trying to teach you something. God's going to use that to teach you something that you can use down the road, maybe for yourself again or maybe for someone else. And that's why you consider it joy. And we talked about the trials that they were going through back then, being persecuted and that kind of thing. So anyway, we're at verse 5, and we're going to look at verses 5 and 6. If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. But when you ask, you must believe and not doubt, because the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea blown and tossed by the wind. Right. So, James is telling them, okay, now, you're going through this trial. You don't know why, just like us. You know, we have things that come into our lives, and it's like, God, why is this? I'm doing everything I'm supposed to do. I go to church on Sunday. I throw the money in the plate. I do all this, but I'm going through this trial. Why is that? And that's what James is saying. Don't worry about questioning. If you really want to know what's going on with this trial, ask God to show you. And that's what it's talking about, the wisdom, asking God to show you, okay, here's what I want you to learn in whatever it is that you're going through. And here's what I want you to do with this information that I've given you. And James is telling them, don't be afraid to ask. Now to us, it's like, why would you be afraid to ask God? We those of us that have grown up in the church, we understand that, if you've got a problem, you want something taken care of, you want to know something, you go to God and ask. We understand that. And so we don't question that. So whenever we read that, it's like, why would they doubt? Now, remember that these are Jews. These are Jews that have been scattered out. Now, the Jews were accustomed to giving all their anything they wanted to talk to God about, they told the priest. The priest went in and talked to God. The Jews didn't do it themselves. So yeah, they're going to have doubts. Like, James, what are you telling us? Don't tell us this, because we know that you can't approach God. James is saying, yes, you can. Yes, you can. Don't be afraid to approach God whenever you have issues going on. And it's the same thing with us today. You got something going on, don't be afraid to go to God. Don't be afraid to go and ask Him for wisdom. And, you know, how many of us have said, and I know that every one of us have heard people say, you know, whenever they talk about where'd you get your education, I got mine from the School of Hard Knocks. Well, they've accumulated wisdom for the trials that they went through. And that's what it's talking about. You're going through a trial, don't be afraid to ask God. Approach Him and ask Him. Ask and don't doubt. Verse 7. That person should not expect to receive anything. And that's talking about the person that's tossed about on the waves. That person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Such a person is double-minded and unstable in all they do. Pretty harsh words, really, whenever you look at that. It's saying that if you go to God and you ask Him to help to get through this trouble, trial, whatever it is, and you don't think you're going to get the help, you're not going to get it. If it's your birthday, and I bring you a gift, and I hand you the gift, and you say, oh, that's great, and you put that on the shelf without opening it, that's what it's talking about right here. Is that if you go to God and you ask Him for a gift and you don't think He's going to give it to you, and you don't open it whenever He does, that's what it's talking about. Is that God will answer your prayer. Don't ever doubt it. Now, it says such a person is double-minded and unstable in all they do. Now, on whenever you first look at this, you think, okay, whenever we hear of unstable, we think of a person that buckles under pressure, well, I don't have to go. Whenever we think of unstable, what they're talking about, and this is what James is talking about, and it goes back to the verse that the person that's tossed about on the wind, one direction or the other. Now, when I was about 21 years old, I had a pontoon boat. I kept it on Forbes Lake. When that thing, every once in a while, the engine would quit. It was an old motor. Now remember, I was 20-some years old. You're not going to be able to afford the fancy. Okay? I didn't have the fancy. Every once in a while, that motor would quit. And if I didn't throw out the anchor to hold it, even though it's a larger boat, it was all over that lake. The way the winds would go, the waves would go, there was no way to control it. You went wherever the wind made it go. James is saying, when you ask God, let God take care of it. Don't go looking for the solution somewhere else. Because God's going to give you the answer and the solution to whatever problem it is that you're dealing with. God's going to help you deal with it. But don't go somewhere else. Turn on Dr. Phil or one of the others or that kind of thing. Give it to God. Let Him take care of it. And that's what it means by unstable, is that you want to get as many answers as you can from different sources. But if you've given it to God, that's all you need to do. That's what he's talking about. God is going to take care of it. Verses 9, I think it's 9 through 11 is what I have. Believers in humble circumstances ought to take pride in their high position, but the rich should take pride in their humiliation, since they will pass away like a wildfire. For the sun arises with scorching heat and withers the plants. It blossoms falls, and its beauty is destroyed. In the same way, the rich will fade away, even while they go about their business. Now, as I said before, that these Jews were scattered out throughout the known world then. That after Stephen was stoned, they all went different directions. And these guys are refugees. All right, refugees is something that we can understand in our world today. There's a lot of talk in the news today about refugees, immigrants, that kind of thing. That's what these people were. That's what these people were. They were strangers in other lands. So they didn't have the best of everything. They worked for everything that they had, and they didn't have very much at all. And when you don't have very much, you always want more. You always want what somebody else has. And James is telling them, don't get too caught up in that. Don't get too caught up in wanting to be rich, and don't let that take over your life. It's not that there's anything wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with having money. Nothing at all, unless the money has you. And I read this quote this week as I was studying, and don't strive too hard to get rich, because you know what? Nobody carries a wallet in heaven. Don't strive to get rich, because nobody carries a wallet in heaven. In other words, you can't take it with you. And that's what he says in there, is that the sun's going to come up and it's going to wilt these flowers. Even though as good as it looks, as good as that money looks, it's not going to last forever. And he's telling the Jews that, and it sounds to me like, whenever you put all of these verses together from verse 1 all the way down to this one, is that most of the troubles and the trials that they're going through are because they are trying to get rich. They see what everybody else has, and they spend their focus on getting rich and going after money. Once again, having money, there's nothing wrong with that, unless it consumes your whole life. And it's kind of interesting that, just verses before this, that double-minded. Basically, you can't serve two masters. Same thing that Jesus said in back whenever he was preaching, was that you can't serve God and money. James is saying the same thing here. We're no different today. We're no different today. We look, the old keeping up with the Joneses, that kind of thing. And we look at what others have or don't have, and I think I've probably said it from up here before. When I grew up, we didn't have very much. There were 7 of us kids in the family. And we didn't have very much. We didn't even know. We had no idea. I had no idea until I got out into the world. Until I was grown, I was out of school, and I looked at what everybody else had, and it's like, whoa, wait a minute. And for years, I thought that would make me happy. It didn't. It did. Long story short, and Janet will tell you, sometimes he gets frustrated with me. Money doesn't excite me as much as it did 30 years ago. I would tell my boss, you know what, you can keep your raise, give me more time. More time at home with my family, those kind of things. Anyway, back to the original thing, is that don't get too caught up in chasing after money, because most of the time, that's what causes most of our problems. Most of our trials is because we are going after something that we shouldn't be too concerned about anyway. Make sense? Verse 12. Blessed is the person under trial, who perseveres under trial, because having stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to him. James says, stay strong, don't give up. Whatever trial it is that you're going through, because there's a reward at the end. The crown of life that Jesus promised. And if Jesus promised it, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. It's not like us that, I'll do that, I promise. Something better comes along and we forget all about that promise. Jesus is not that way. He keeps that promise, that crown of life. So this trial that you're going through, it's to test your faith, test your endurance. I mentioned last week about playing sports in school that we had to. There was a lot of training that went through it. Running the steps, running the sprints, running long distance, and exercising and that kind of thing. Boy, it wasn't much fun when you were doing it, whenever you were going through those trials. However, whenever it came to game time, you can tell which team is in better shape than the other one at the end of the game. You can tell because one team can endure and the other one can't. Now multiply that many, many times over, and that's what James is talking about here, is that you go through those trials, that it tests you and it tests your endurance to see if you can persevere all the way to the end to get that promise, that crown of life that Jesus promises. Now let's go over to Revelation. Revelation chapter 3, if you want to turn there, in verses 10 and 11. And I'm going to close with these verses. Now, this is in the middle of where Jesus is sending letters to the churches. And almost all the churches, he's telling them the mistakes they've made, the things that they have done wrong, what they need to do better. This is writing to the church in Philadelphia. And in verses 10 and 11, and do good to go through and read the whole thing, but it says, since you have kept my command to endure patiently, I will also keep you from the hour of trial that is going to come on the whole world to test the inhabitants of the earth. Verse 11, I am coming soon. Hold on to what you have so that no one will take your crown. So, moral of the story. We all go through trials. We go through them to teach us lessons down the road and to gain that prize, the crown of life. Jesus is saying here to the church in Philadelphia, and if you go through and read it, you have been faithful. You have been faithful. You've done everything that you were supposed to do. You stayed true to the word. You did this, you did that. Whenever trials came, you stuck with it. Now, because of that, you're going to get a reward. You're going to get that crown, and that crown is that while everybody else is suffering, You're not going to. You're not going to. Every one of us are given that promise. Every one of us are given that promise. Choose Christ. Choose Christ. I wish I would tell you that when you do, it's going to be easy. No, it's not. Matter of fact, it's probably going to get tough. Probably going to get tougher. You're going to have to deal with things you've never dealt before if you haven't made that decision. If you already made that decision, you know what it's like to go through. But James is saying, endure. Endure. Stay true to the end, and you'll be given that crown, or the crown of life you've already taken hold of, you'll be able to keep. Think about that as we sing our hymn of the decision today, which is Let There Be Peace. Okay. Right there. If you would stand, please. Thank you once again, and if you want to study for next week's sermon, just start right there where we left off. Go ahead and read. If you read the whole book, it takes about 20 minutes. 20 minutes. All right, enough about that announcements. I really want to emphasize